selectivity and catch and release impacts there?
Yeah, thank you very much. Unfortunately, I cannot show you cool stuff like GTs or bluefin tunas. We have only less cool species like flatfishes in the Baltic Sea where I'm from. But I'm going to present you a study we did on hook selectivity and post-release survival on flatfish in the Baltic Sea recreational fishery. And to give you some background, this is on the map. You see the Baltic Sea. It's located in northern Europe, and it's actually the largest brackish sea in the world. So it has quite interesting environmental conditions. And flatfishes are one of the most important target species for commercial and recreational fishers in the Baltic Sea, but also very important target species in Europe. And in the Baltic Sea, we have these three different species, which are the most abundant one. It's European plaice, flounder, and the dab. Due to a collapse of Baltic cod stocks, actually the popularity of flatfish angling has increased quite a lot in the Baltic Sea in recent years. And you can see this in the diagram below. You see two estimates of catches, one from 2014-15 and one from 2021 and 2022. And you see these, if you compare the bars, you see that the catches increased. So we are talking about around 2 million flatfishes that are caught alone by German Baltic anglers each year. However, a quite large proportion of these flatfishes is released, around 1/3 of them, for various reasons. And so far there has been no information on post-release mortality for these species at all on a European level. And this is actually a problem because, for example, in the Western Baltic Sea, there are plans now to include recreational catches in the stock assessments for plaice, for example. So there's actually a knowledge gap. So the study the study had actually three aims. So the first was to evaluate selectivity, catch rates, and hooking positions of three different hooks that can be used in the flatfish fishery. Then we wanted to estimate post-release mortality and identify also the most relevant factors for mortality. And the third one was actually then trying to use the results we get and develop species and fishery specific best practice guidelines to increase or to maximize survival and also fish welfare in this fishery. So there was actually a quite hands-on experiment. We did a field experiment and we conducted a containment study with 6 trials from March until August. So this covers the spring and the summertime. So we got increasing temperatures from cool water until hot summer, more or less. And we did experimental fishing with a common charter vessel. So this vessel, you see it there, it's quite big. It's offering flatfish fishing trips for anglers, and we got help from voluntary anglers from an angling association, which was quite nice. So they joined us for each experimental trial and fished for us. For the experiment, we used a standardized flatfish rig, and the rigs were very similar, but the only difference was the hook. So we had the same hook model. You can see it here in the pictures. It's a typical flatfish hook for using worms. So the bait is usually a worm. And we choose the same model in 2 different sizes. So it was size 2 and 2.0, a big and a small one. And then actually one of the anglers had the idea to include a new hook. So it's a small hook, size 2, the same model, but with we call it a swallow barrier. So we just attached a little wire at the shaft of the hook, and that should help to avoid deep hooking of the flatfish. So that was what we wanted to test. And all anglers fished alternately with the different rigs and the different hooks, but the fishing effort was kept equal to make comparison possible. So when they caught a fish, we recorded different kind of data for each fish, like hooking position, species, of course, also the angler skills. And then we tagged each fish with a T-bar to make, just to make it possible to identify each fish. We had then a short on-board holding until we got enough fish for a cage. And you see the cage here in the picture. So that was a cage, and flatfish are usually just lying on the bottom, moving a bit around, but they don't need a lot of space usually. So the fish were then placed in this cage and lowered down to the capture depth at this fishing spot. And then we hold the fish for around 6 to 7 days to see if they, how they reacted and if they survived or not. And after 6-7 days, we put up the cages again and checked for survival. And at some, or at least at every fishing spot, we also equipped the cages with a temp and a O2 logger to monitor environmental conditions. So this is just for the results. You see, we got 3 different hooking positions. It was, we only choose 3 because the anglers themselves should be able to identify the hooking location. So it was mouth hooking was in the front, then we had this medium hooking, which was more in the mouth cavity, and then deep hooking was everything in the esophagus and in the stomach. And now just to show you some numbers from the fishery or the fishing characteristics. So we had on board around 20 anglers each trial, varying age, also varying avidity, and in total they fished over 540 hours and used over 6,000 of these worms. And they caught quite a massive amount of fish. So it was 3,650 flatfish during this 6 trips. And the mean catch per unit effort was around 7 flatfish per angler and hour. So this is quite an effective fishery, actually. And you see there, we mainly caught plaice. That was the main fish that was abundant in the study site. And we get quite a nice length range between very small fish of 12 centimeters up to the maximum length, which is around 50 centimeters. So the first thing we wanted to see if the different hooks have any effect on the catch rates. Because of this, of course, this is important for the anglers to see if I choose a certain hook, if this has any effect on the catch. And as you can see, it's divided by the different species, but you can see that actually there were no real big differences in catch rates between the small and the large hook, and also the hook with a swallow barrier. So more or less they caught, with each hook they caught the same amount of fish. The second thing we wanted to see if there's any size selectivity effect of the hook. So if maybe the larger hook catches larger fish also. And in the box plot, you see that there's hardly any there's no significant effect. So there was hardly any effect of the hook size regarding the size of the fish. And then we looked at the hooking positions. With hooking position, of course, is one of the most important factors influencing post-release mortality. And there we saw an effect of the different hooks. So for example, the small hooks, as expected, had the highest deep hooking rate. And the larger hook already reduced deep hooking a bit. That was already significant. But the barrier hook actually, really showed us really good results. So it prevented deep hooking quite a lot. And we had only 1% of the fish being deep hooked. So this was quite effective, actually. When looking at the results of the post-release mortality study, we experienced pretty low mortality. You see in the table some differences between the species, but the sample sizes were also very unequal. So it seems like flounder were the most robust, and then plaice and dab. But what we also saw was that 70% or over 70% of the dead fish were deep hooked, and almost also 70% showed bleeding when we removed the hook. And you may recognize that we didn't include a control group, but we were lucky because we had a very similar study 2 years ago, before this study, where we investigated post-release mortality of commercially caught flatfish with a very similar design. And there we found that just the holding in the cages and the handling produced a mortality rate of about 2%. So it's the holding itself seems to be has very little effect on the mortality. So this is something, of course, you can adjust for then. And looking at the seasonal trends, this is again pooled data for all 3 species. You see that there's quite an effect of the water temperature on post-release mortality. In spring, when the water temperature is quite cool, it's around 5 to 6 degrees, mortality was rather low, and then it steadily increased until hot summer. So August is usually the time with the highest water temperature in the Baltic Sea. So it's around something 19-20 degrees usually. So to conclude, we saw that the 3 hooks we used produced actually similar catch rates. So there's no need for the anglers to choose a small hook. This is something they really like to do because they think if they choose a bigger hook and they catch less flatfish. There was little difference in the size selectivity of the different hooks, so it doesn't really matter. At least the hook size we used, there was no big difference in the size of the caught fish. But we saw that the use of large hooks reduces deep hooking, even though the effect was limited. And these barrier hooks really worked well. So that would be an option actually for the anglers. So far, no producer is producing this kind of hook. So this is something the industry could work on. And we had also problems with the durability of the hooks because after a while, usually this little wire broke down, and then of course the effect was gone. Circle hooks might be an alternative for this fishery. They are very uncommon in Germany. In different fisheries, they are usually not used, so this could be something, but I think they are a bit more difficult to bait with a worm. And yeah, as we saw, post-release mortality was rather low, so this is a good sign because releasing flatfish works, and they are still available for the stock and for reproduction. And the most important factors were deep hooking and high water temperatures. So yeah, this is it, and thank you very much for your attention. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. One very short question.
Thanks. I didn't hear at the beginning, but how did you remove the hooks? Did you take them out even if they were swallowed?
Yeah.
And was it by hand?
Yeah, that was a decision of the anglers actually, because we wanted to simulate realistic conditions. It's different. Some use it by hand. It depends, of course, of the hooking position. So if it's just in the mouth, they just remove it by hand. Some use pliers, and actually there's another method that is, I'm not sure if it is used somewhere else. In other fisheries, they have a stick which they push in the mouth, and then they turn the line around, and then they make circles with the fish, so it's turning around, and somehow the hook get turned out. It works really well, but we investigated that, and there was actually not a real big effect on the mortality. So they use it for deep hooked fish, but it looks really strange, I must say, that they fly around. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.